Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. Folks, I'm so excited today to be joined by Kyle Marchak. Kyle is a student at Virginia Tech. He's in the SMA Sports Media Analytics program, class of 2025. He's got involved in so many different things at Virginia Tech, from tech sideline to Hokie Sports. He's going to be going out to St. Cloud, Minnesota, to call games for the Rocks summer baseball. And he's a Syracuse, New York native. Kyle, I know I listed a lot of stuff about you there, but thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you. You've done your prep. I'm very impressed. Totally a ton of different things to learn about me, right?
Yeah, for sure. So I want to start off with first, when did you know you wanted to become a sports broadcaster? Because this is something you're obviously very passionate about.
Yeah, when you ask me that question, I think of my conversation with Bailey Engel, of all people, who graduated from Tech, I believe, in 17. He was also a Gym Nance Award placer and stuff like that. And he's obviously very good at what he does as a broadcaster. And I interviewed him for a project I had last year, and he told me that the path a lot of people take into sports broadcasting is a real interest in sports and then realizing that they can't make it as an athlete. So then they want to talk about it. So for a long answer short, I'd say probably early high school is when I started to realize that I wanted to talk about sports for a living.
And, it's interesting because you are a Syracuse native. I mean, you literally grew up in the backyard of Syracuse University, which is the mecca of sports broadcasting. All the great sport broadcasters have gone there. So, I mean, you grew up in their backyard. What made you decide to come down south to Blacksburg, Virginia, and Virginia Tech?
Well, I'll put it this way first. It wasn't an easy decision. As an 18-year-old at the time, deciding from my mentality the entire time was the obvious choice to go to Newhouse. It's the best program in the country and X, Y, and Z. And then, decision day is probably looming 4 months out. And then Bill Roth, the guy who created and runs this program so hands-on here at Virginia Tech, and a program that's really blossoming, reached out to my buddy Gio. And then through Gio, I got in contact with him. And Gio and I had been broadcasting together at our high school, Cicero North Syracuse. And it just kind of happened from there, realizing in terms of, there were multiple factors: the culture, the cost, and the opportunities. but definitely the cost was a big factor of it, right? But yeah, in all seriousness, it was the culture and the opportunities at Virginia Tech that said to me that regardless of the name brand of any other program I applied for, especially Newhouse, Virginia Tech was the right school for me.
And, you're involved with 3304 Sports here at Tech. So for those who don't know, can you explain what that is and how has that opened up more opportunities for you to do stuff with Tech Sideline and Hokie Sports?
Yeah, 3304 is super fundamental to my development as a young sports broadcaster. It's the student-run sports media group here at Virginia Tech. So we're in representation of Virginia Tech sports. We have this for play-by-play specifically. We have a format where we call games radio style. We're blessed to be credentialed and have a really good ongoing relationship with our athletics department here. So we've been working very closely with them as kind of that leading student-run group and representation of sports media here. And so there are opportunities with 3304 in radio style play-by-play. Really polished work in the studio that we have at the Moss Art Center, which we're very blessed to be working in, and then also writing. So there's a ton of opportunities with 3304, and the more you work with 3304, the more you have a portfolio or a reel to show to other companies in the area, including Tech Sideline, which is how those connections can kind of develop from there for sure.
What's been your most favorite venue you've traveled to, or maybe is there a memorable game you've called so far with 3304 that you took away like, man, like this is so awesome, I can't believe I'm having a chance to do this?
Yeah, 100%. I'd say every time I go on the road, it's surreal to me because I just turned 20, but for the most part, everything I've done, I was, an 18, 19-year-old here at Tech. So everything I do is mind-boggling, surreal, and really humbling too, to think that I'm blessed with the opportunities that I have here at Tech. It's really cool. I think of two trips. Last year was the first time I really experienced something like that. 3304 trusted to send me on the road with a couple of my freshman buddies and the Nick Brown who's a sophomore or a junior in the program. He was a sophomore at the time, down to Greensboro, North Carolina for the ACC women's basketball tournament. And to call games in that venue, especially one game I called NC State was competing in, so a packed Greensboro Coliseum, because NC State's presence for women's hoops was incredible. That was definitely my first taste of being at an event that felt larger than itself, is the way I would describe it. So that was really humbling. And then I actually just had my first trip to Durham at Cameron Indoor a week and a half ago with my buddy Robert Bateman, and him and I were on the call for that one. So yeah, those were two moments where, to look back at it and see myself as a sophomore this year and my friend Rob as a freshman, for him and I to get the opportunity to travel to Cameron Indoor and call a game was very, very surreal. So that was definitely the most fun I've had in a trip so far.
So how did this opportunity come up? Because one way we are both connected is that we're both kind of in this family of Virginia Tech students to have called games in Northwoods League, and you're following both Evan Hughes and Jake Lyman, and becoming the third guy from Tech to call a game for the St. Cloud Rocks, team in the Northwoods League, Summer Collegiate Wood Bat League that's located. This team is located in Minnesota, St. Cloud, Minnesota, but you've got teams in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, kind of all in the Midwest area of our country. How did this opportunity open up to get the chance to call games for the Rocks this summer?
It's kind of a timing thing. Well, first of all, it was both shocking, humbling, and really just crazy to think that they wanted to continue that pipeline with myself. It was very humbling, and it's tough, almost with like a little bit of an imposter syndrome, right? Because you have Evan Hughes, who's a Jim Nantz Award winner, and then you have Jake Lyman, who's the voice of Vanderbilt women's basketball right now, and now they're handing it off to the next young kid. So it's really humbling. And yeah, it was a timing thing. They decided at St. Cloud after 2 years with Jake that Jake obviously after this past summer is ready to move on to bigger and better things. So they were kind of working in conjunction with Jake and Evan on who they believe at Virginia Tech would be ready to take over. And there were a lot of candidates that they looked through, but I was really blessed for them to give me the call. So yeah, no, it was very exciting when they told me that they wanted me to be the one that could be the next representative. And then I went through the interviewing process, had a couple interviews, sent them my stuff, and got the call a few days later that they wanted me to continue the VT pipeline. So that was really exciting. My mom had a more shocking reaction than I did. I try and keep calm when I can. My mom was like, "Oh my God, we got to pack our bags for Minnesota." So, but it was very awesome to get that call.
That's awesome, man. Congrats. And I guess my question is, have you done any research so far? Have you looked at some of the other teams you'll be playing? Obviously, having done it myself, I mean, it's a 72 game schedule in 78 days. So not a lot of days off. You're on a lot of long
Yeah.
bus rides, a lot of games where you'll go play them. And then right after the game, bus back to your hometown. And, it all very, kind of getting back in the late hours of the night. I mean, anything you've kind of done research on so far that you're looking forward to? They're like, oh, I really got to wait and see what this is going to be like.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I should be asking you, right? You have more experience than me, which is why I was glad that you gave me the call to hop on this podcast, because I think I'm going to pick some stuff up from you, hopefully, that'll mentally prepare me for a 72 game schedule in, I believe, a matter of 80 days. So not a lot of breaks. That's what I've recollected so far. It's the biggest, baddest summer ball league in the country. So it's awesome. And I can't wait, honestly. I know how grueling the schedule is with the pacing and stuff. But even the small stretch of consecutive games I got last year in the New York Collegiate Baseball League, I felt so much improvement. So that's what I look forward to. But yeah, to answer your question, Evan harped on it with me to make sure that I say that the St. Cloud Rocks are the Yankees of the Northwoods League. So that's the way he describes it. I'm not sure if that opinion is exactly correct. According to the history, I mean, the Rocks are hot, right? So that's a terminology. But as far as I know, yeah, tough schedule. They've done well with their divisions in terms of making sure teams aren't traveling too much. I think I might actually start in Waterloo. And then it's a whole lot of Thunder Bay, maybe a little bit of Fond du Lac. See, I got to get my teams down because there are a bunch of different teams that we cycle through in the division. But yeah, my knowledge is still developing. We'll put it that way.
Yeah. Will you have a chance to go to lacrosse? Because that's where I called games, lacrosse,
Actually,
Wisconsin
yeah,
summer.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we play the Loggers a ton, actually.
Yeah, and
Now
so
that
that'll be great. I mean, that was I think one thing you'll learn too is that for a lot of these cities, it's really, the Northwoods League is their professional team because they don't live conveniently close to like an actual professional team. So especially when you get into late August, the pennant race of the Northwoods League for them, I mean, it's really like their playoff race. So I think you'll enjoy Copeland Park. I'm biased, but I mean, it always sells out. You've got, they call themselves the Copeland Crazies, 3,000 fans who are just really
wow.
passionate about the game. So I think you'll have a chance to enjoy that. And yeah, be prepared. You're probably going to be eating unhealthy a lot unless you kind of make the individual time to prepare for that. But a lot of pizza, pulled pork. So I think you'll be in for it. But it's definitely a great experience and something that you'll definitely enjoy for sure.
A lot of pizza sounds fine to me, to be honest with you. That sounds good.
And I was curious too. Being from Syracuse, upstate New York, what are your favorite professional sports teams?
Yeah, ironically enough, I'm spread all over the map. I grew up a baseball kid. So, just for starters, to keep it local, being from Syracuse, I'm a Syracuse University guy for sure. I grew up definitely in a thick culture of Cuse men's basketball, because that's what was most successful. I do find myself torn when we play Cuse, Virginia Tech, meaning we. So, that's that. But in terms of professional sports, I'm literally all over the place. My grandfather on my father's side is from Philadelphia. And the only sport we retain from Philadelphia is the Phillies. So it's been a good year for me. I'm a diehard Phillies fan. You can see there it is, Chase Utley, Ryan Howard, and Jimmy Rollins next to each other in that poster there. So I've retained that big time. After that, my grandpa played football at Syracuse and kept a tight connection with Larry Zonka, who ended up being a tailback for the Dolphins. So I'm actually a big Miami Dolphins fan next, and then after that, I don't know if where my professional sports following is really tied to too much. I was a big Carmelo Anthony fan for obvious reasons, and then his kind of NBA career is over. So I'm actually in the middle of creating this fun little contract with me and a couple of my buddies, and we're gonna become Orlando Magic fans probably, just because it feels fitting to choose one of the worst teams in the NBA and just like hope 20 years from now that they go on a run or something, because then it'll be really redeeming. For now, it'll be awful, but I think it'd be funny.
Yeah, I know we've talked about this before, but I'm a big Nationals fan. So,
Yeah,
obviously got that NL East rivalry going. And you guys got a lot of former Nationals now. I mean, Trey Turner, Bryce Harper, Kyle Schwarber,
yeah,
Kevin Long, who's a great hitting coach, won the World Series with the Nats. He's on the team. And, seeing that poster, I mean, I remember growing up literally hating Jimmy Rollins and Chase Utley and Ryan Howard. But I will say I was happy. And I guess this is where I wanted to go next. I mean, what was it like watching that Phillies team last season run through the playoffs and unfortunately lose to the Astros, but still an incredible run after they fired Joe Girardi, replaced him with Rob Thompson, and go back on the run? I mean, for me, even though I hated the Phillies growing up and they hadn't been good in a while, I just thought it was great for the sport and great for Philly, which is a great sports town, to see the Phillies back in the World Series. So what was your kind of thoughts as you watched Philadelphia make that World Series run last year?
oh geez, I mean, I can't help but agree with the fact that it was great for the city and it was great for the sport of baseball, because Philly has this unique culture of kind of frenzied fans that really packed Citizens Bank Park when it's go time, and it was unreal. It was completely unbelievable. I had grown into such a pessimist as a Phillies fan because they had such a strong roster for what felt like the past 5 years, and they couldn't crack the playoffs. And now, not only do they crack the playoffs, but when they do, they go on the run of all runs. They were the surprise team of baseball this year, and people who know me know that I'm a diehard Philly all the way. It's the only team that I've ever cared about, and kind of like my buddy Luke, who's a Jets fan. It's like people question why I care so much about the team because they stink 99% of the time. Um, so yeah, no, it was literally unbelievable. I mean, it brought me so much closer to my father and my grandfather too, because I'm down here in Virginia, they're both up in New York, and during a whole playoff stretch, I'm up at 1 a.m. talking to my 80-year-old grandfather. I mean, how is that dude up? The only thing that would ever keep Big Jim up at night is a Phillies game. So it was awesome. I think that little anecdote really wraps up how meaningful it actually was to me. It was awesome.
That's awesome. And do you think the Phillies have what it takes to win it all next year? I mean, they added Trey Turner, who's a big bat in free agency, for $300 million, and so you've got a lot of great offensive weapons in that lineup. Do you think they can stack up against teams like the Mets and the Dodgers in the NL, and again some of the great AL teams?
It's That's a good question. The tough part is you add Trey Turner to the lineup. I really do think that makes the Phillies one of the strongest lineups in baseball. But Bryce Harper's out until probably the last third of the regular season. So it just depends on how much offense they're going to produce without their best bat. Because I don't think there's a question that Bryce Harper's the best bat they have. So right now, if I had to give a prediction, I still don't see them winning the NL East, in all honesty, even though they were the clear best team from the National League. They just don't perform late in the regular season. I'm not sure if it's a depth issue, which is something we always worry about with the bullpen and the rotation, or if it's just the way this team is built. But they tend to be a little bit slower in the latter half of the season. So I'm going to go and say they'll be in the wild card for sure. I wouldn't be shocked if they made another run to a pennant chance. But in all honesty, I do think it's really difficult to reproduce what they did last year.
And you look at your NFL team, the Miami Dolphins. I mean, they're another team that you kind of feel like is on the cusp. Obviously they got in my opinion, the best receiving duo in the game, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. You've got Tua, who had a good season, but he's been plagued by concussion and injury issues. Mike McDaniel in his first year pretty solid. They lost 5 games really at the end of the regular season, but were able to sneak into the playoffs. And even with their third stringer and Skylar Thompson, I mean, they gave the Bills a run for their money. So what are your thoughts on the Dolphins? It really kind of seems like moving forward, it's really based on the health of Tua Tagovailoa. Can he remain healthy and get the Dolphins to that next level of being a Super Bowl contender?
See, that's the trend, right, with the Dolphins is, what is Tua going to do the next few years? But the way Skylar Thompson performed and made that Bills playoff game competitive shows to you that it has nothing to do with the quarterback at the end of the day. Mike McDaniel is really good at using his repertoire as best as possible. I still think he's a young coach and you can tell that he's a young coach with some mistakes he does. He struggled to get big play calls oftentimes late in that Bills game. And definitely made Skylar Thompson look like a rookie quarterback the way he was too. But yeah, in terms of trajectory, I think the fact that Mike McDaniel made the team perform as well as it did without Tua in so many games this season, it's hard to not look at the Dolphins as a possible contender within the next half decade or so. They can definitely build up to that. It obviously just depends on whether or not Tua can stay healthy.
I'm curious too, because he was linked to the Dolphins, at least for a little bit before he retired. But would you have been okay with Tom Brady for a year? I mean, if you think about the fact that, I mean, look, he didn't look great, I think, at the end of the season, but I would still say he was better than at least 15 other quarterbacks in the league. And again, Tua's health issues are a serious concern. So would you have been okay with, hey, you bring in Tom Brady for a year, you work with a guy like Mike McDaniel, he's got this great offense to work with, and you make a run at the Super Bowl in the same division as Josh Allen? I mean, what were your thoughts on that if it did happen?
Considering the Dolphins have an improved O-line, I would have had no problem with Tom Brady in the pocket for us. It's tough to tell whether or not he'd be a good pocket passer with the receivers that we have. But with a guy like Tyreek who has breakaway speed, I think it would have worked out pretty fine. I would have loved that. I remember seeing a bunch of, the jersey photoshops and stuff like that. Like once Tom Brady was leaving New England, you see, obviously the Buccaneers were one of the first jerseys you saw photoshopped onto him because that was in the talks. But other than that, yeah, you saw a whole lot of Miami jerseys photoshopped onto him. And it was weird, right? Because we had Ryan Tannehill leaving, and then we're in that limbo for a couple of years until we got Tua. So I would have been a complete proponent of that to help lead Tua too, because I think Tua wasn't quite ready to be a full-time starting quarterback the past couple of years. This year, he definitely improved though.
And I was curious, while we're on that topic, what are your thoughts on Tom Brady retired? I mean, if he officially announces on his Twitter and social media that he is retiring, I was kind of surprised because he was linked to the Niners and to a lesser extent the Dolphins, two teams that I think with the quarterback are right there in the mix for a Super Bowl championship. I mean, obviously, look, after 23 seasons, the guy's 46. I mean, is it, I think it's maybe a little too much to say, oh, he could have given us one more year, but I thought for me, it's not as surprising as say last year when he retired because he was coming off a great year. You really thought, oh man, he can, with the right team around him, take another, have another chance at the Super Bowl. But, this year with kind of how, for lack of a better word, mid he looked for much of the season, it's not as surprising, but I don't know. Part of me was still saying like, man, yeah, I really felt like if he could have given one more year, maybe go to a team like San Francisco where he's from. They've got all the pieces around him, the defense for him to kind of just take a run one more year at another Super Bowl. What were your thoughts on him deciding to ultimately retire?
Well, I think now's the best time he could have, but perfectly for me, it should have been after that Bucks championship, right? But you can't write the script for Tom Brady's career. The thing I respect about Tom Brady is that he, out of all, let's say inner circle all-time great athletes in their sport, is one of the most well-spoken. And that doesn't mean that he's particularly a well-spoken person all the time. I think every athlete has their glaring moments. But after watching that retirement video today, I think he really did lay it to rest. He said, the first time I didn't commit to it and I didn't get it all the way through. I already had my chance to give you guys this whole long retirement monologue. So I'll keep it simple this time. I'm retiring. I think that's a very fitting way for Tom Brady to kind of close things out. I think this is a great time for him to retire.
So you don't think there's any chance he comes back, even if the Niners call him and say, "Hey, man, we've got this team around." You don't think there's any chance he comes back?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's the thing is the reason I don't think he will is because of all the inner circle greats. He was one of the few that like actually was truly a man of his word. He didn't mess around with contract negotiations or anything like that. He was always very straightforward in what he wanted. So I'm fairly confident that this is it for him. But look, I mean, that dude pulled this last year out of nowhere, and risked some other relations in his life for it. So you never know with this guy. And that's the thing with all-time greats. They don't know when to stop competing. Michael Jordan came back after a mini baseball career, so it's like you literally never know.
And I wanted to ask you this question too, because this is a debate I've gotten into with Evan Hughes, who's a mutual friend of ours. Look, I'm not denying Tom Brady is the GOAT. When you look at a vacuum, you look at all the numbers, Super Bowl championships, he is overall the GOAT. But I'm also going to argue that he is the luckiest of all time. I mean, you look at some of these Super Bowls that he's gotten a chance to win. We all know if Pete Carroll runs that ball with Marshawn Lynch, they lose that Super Bowl. Falcons are up 28-3. He should have lost that Super Bowl. No one's denying that. You look at, I mean, so again, I hate to be that guy, but some of his Super Bowls, were kind of tainted by Spygate, by Deflategate. Look, he is a great quarterback. Like, I'm not saying he's a bum by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm also looking at this guy and saying this guy had some of the greatest all-time luck in order to win some of these Super Bowls. So I still maintain he is the GOAT, but he is also the luckiest of all time. What do you say about that?
That's a hot take, right? Because it's you. I don't want to say directly discrediting an all-time great, right? Because what he did is what he did. But my take on it is this: the more inner circle all-time great someone's career appears to be, I feel like inherently the more negative connotation they have. I think there's a pretty equal correlation between how big someone's career is, quote unquote, and how much controversy they're engulfed in. And so, in all honesty, I think regardless of how good Tom Brady plays throughout his career, he's going to be surrounded in some sort of controversy. Now, some of it is legitimately concerning, right? Like Deflategate and things like that. But there's a difference between Tom Brady being suspected of certain things throughout his career and maybe being a little lucky here and there, and someone like Barry Bonds, who very blatantly did steroids, and then that improved his career, which stinks because Barry Bonds would have been a Hall of Famer if he didn't take steroids. So yeah, I feel like it's tough to tell because how big your name is adds to how much you're shrouded in controversy. I don't think Tom Brady is shrouded in that level of like really lucky on the high scale plus controversies or suspicions here and there. I don't think he's covered in enough of that for you to like actually take away from his career. But I can't agree with you that he was a pretty lucky guy throughout his career. I think Belichick is a lot of that luck for him too.
Yeah, and I mean, also, if you look at it to be fair on the other side, I mean, if David Tyree doesn't make a catch or if he has any semblance of a defense in that second Super Bowl against the Eagles, then he might even be undefeated in Super Bowl. So, I mean,
Yeah.
you give and take both sides there. But good discussion there. Let's transition now to the NFL playoffs and recap Championship Sunday. I mean, an exciting Sunday it was last week. The Eagles crushed the Niners in the first game, 31-7, and the Chiefs beat the Bengals in a thriller. Harrison Butker kicks a field goal as time expired to send the Chiefs back to their third Super Bowl in the last couple of years. Let's go first, Kyle, to the Eagles-Niners game. Of course, like I mentioned, the Eagles crushed them 31-7. A lot of storylines in that game. Brock Purdy, who was the third-string quarterback going into the game for the Niners after having been undefeated for, 10 games it was previously. He injures his elbow. Josh Johnson, their backup, comes in. He gets a concussion, and they brought Purdy back, but it was very obvious that he wasn't throwing the ball more than 5 yards with how hurt his elbow was. CMC was the quarterback at the end of the game. I guess my biggest question for you is, do you think the lack of a Niners QB hurt the overall quality of the game? Because I still think the Eagles were probably favored even with the healthy Purdy, but once he went down and you knew they had no competent backup QBs left, it just felt like it was just a matter of time basically before the Eagles were going to crush them.
Yeah, from a fan's perspective, I'm not even that big of an NFL guy in all honesty. And hearing Purdy was out like a few minutes in the game, I was just like, oh, because you want to see the storyline of what this rookie quarterback can do. When is this kid going to lose, right? And did it hurt the overall quality of the game? 100%. But did it really change things too much? I wouldn't say so, because the 49ers offense was, you could say semi-run heavy. I mean, they were pretty good at using their receiving core as much as possible. And Purdy was a dang good young quarterback for the season that he had. But yeah, it definitely made the game a little less competitive. But in all honesty, I think the Eagles offense is the best in the NFL right now. And I don't think it was going to be that close of a game regardless.
What do you think is the Niners solution at QB? I mean, you're going into next year. Purdy and Lance are going to be recovering from injuries. Kyle Shanahan has already said they're going to let go of Jimmy G. Obviously, Tom Brady retired, so that's kind of a wild card that at least seemingly right now is out of play. There's some other veteran guys out there like a Derek Carr, Aaron Rodgers, maybe, although I've read the Packers won't trade him to the NFC. What is the answer for this Niners team at quarterback? Because it really seems like, man, they're lacking a quarterback. Otherwise, they'd be a perennial Super Bowl favorite.
Yeah, I think like most teams, the 49ers should go one of two ways. I would not be shocked for them to see them draft another young quarterback. And just I think with the sense of competition, whoever this young quarterback may be alongside Purdy could brew a really good quarterback battle in San Francisco. And that could create talent in and of itself, really organically too. I think the smarter route right now is keeping Purdy for sure, and then finding a veteran quarterback to kind of develop the talent under him. So you would definitely want to target a guy like Aaron Rodgers. My guess is their best option. They could probably throw some good money at Derek Carr for maybe a 1 or 2 year, maybe veterans minimum, to toss 10 mil at him. But I've seen it before. I mean, this is biased, but I've seen it before with the Dolphins where, when Tua first got in town, they had Fitzpatrick, or before that, they had Jay Cutler trying to show some of the young quarterbacks the direction too. So you can function well as a team with kind of a duality at quarterback where you have people that are still developing and that veteran ruling the team, getting that young kid reps. So yeah, one of two ways. They got to draft someone and get, brew a quarterback battle, or more likely try and get someone like Derek Carr out of the market.
And then looking at the other side to the Eagles, do you think that their path to the Super Bowl has been pretty easy? I mean, that's kind of a point that I've been seeing online people make, is that, look, you had to play the Giants in your first game, and then you had to play the Niners without a healthy Brock Purdy at quarterback. My response to that is, I mean, I do see people's point, but at the end of the day, you got to win those games. I mean, playing a divisional opponent for the third time, I mean, that's a tough thing to do, to beat them for a third time in a row. And I mean, look, even with the Niners having issues on offense, the Eagles still put up 31 points against them, and then 38 points against the Giants. In the Niners' case, a really good defense. So I just think, I mean, look, you've seen how good the Eagles' offense is. You can't really discredit their run to the Super Bowl simply because of who they've played.
I agree. You can't discredit the Eagles. Look, the reason the Eagles had an easier, I'm not going to say easier path to the Super Bowl, is because they earned the number 1 seed. So you can't bash on them. It's their fault that they got the easiest route to the Super Bowl in the playoffs, because they themselves earned that number 1 seed in the NFC. So for me, I find the idea of discrediting teams' playoff runs pretty ludicrous, because in order for a team to have a good playoff run, they have to start with a good seed, and the Eagles did that. So for me, it's hard to bash on them. But to these naysayers discredit, or credit, that is, the NFC is definitely a little bit weaker this year than the AFC. I'm not going to say there's a glaring difference, but let's just say the Chiefs and the Bengals and teams like that felt a little bit more competitive than the Eagles' path to the Super Bowl so far.
Yeah, speaking of the AFC, I mean, you got all these great young quarterbacks: Pat Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, Tua if he's healthy. So I think Josh Allen. I mean, this AFC is going to have a lot of great competition over the years. And you look at the AFC Championship game. I mean, the Chiefs beat the Bengals 23-20 on a last-second field goal. Pat Mahomes' first time beating Joe Burrow. He was previously 0-3 against Burrow, and I mean, for me, I think unfortunately the thing that stood out, Kyle, was I think the officiating. two plays late that, you could argue, especially in the case of one of them, really cost the Bengals the game. The first one was when the Bengals had stopped them on, I think this was late in the third quarter. They had stopped the Chiefs on defense, and then the refs blew the play dead and said, oh, no, we had signaled the play was dead. And then the more notable one was, the late hit on Pat Mahomes that put the Chiefs essentially in field goal position and allowed them to kick a field goal to win the game. What was your thoughts on the officiating in the game? I just think, by the letter of the law, was it a late hit on Mahomes? Probably. But, I mean, I also do personally think it looked like he flopped a little bit. And I just think, you want the players deciding this game, not the refs, to put one team in a position to win. I think it kind of took away from the ending of the game. I think I tweeted out that it was the lamest ending. But what do you think about that? Do you think the officiating was right and that you got to call it by the letter of the law? Or do you think, it did kind of take away from the game and essentially gifting the Chiefs a game-winning field goal opportunity?
Yeah, it's tough. Usually as a sports broadcast journalist, I struggle to blame games on refs. Look, refs are human. They're going to miss calls. I think what happened in this game is that the missed calls they had happened at really important moments. So you can say that it changed the trajectory of the game, especially that they blatantly missed another unnecessary roughness call down that left sideline, one of those late plays too. So you could say that there were 3 calls that probably could have gone the other way late. So I really hate to say, because I almost never blame games on officiating, but that one definitely looked like it was severely affected by some calls that were all over the place that portion.
And, I was curious too, because there was a lot of talk going into the game, like, oh, Joe Burrow, he's the next Tom Brady. He's undefeated against Pat Mahomes. He just destroyed Josh Allen in the playoffs. The Cincinnati mayor was calling Arrowhead Burrowhead. I mean, to me, I just felt like, look, Joe Burrow's a good quarterback, and he's one of the top. I think he's a top 2 quarterback, second after Mahomes. But I do think he was being slightly overhyped given the fact that he hadn't won a Super Bowl yet. He lost the Super Bowl last year. I still think when Lamar Jackson's healthy, the Ravens are right there with the Bengals in that division. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you think, again, as great as Joe Burrow is, that he was probably being a little bit overhyped going into last week's game?
Maybe a tad. Burrow's one of those guys who knows how to perform in big situations. We've seen that. That's why he has gone on the playoff runs that he's had in the little amount of time he's had in the NFL. I'll put it this way. I would say 10 of our 30 quarterbacks starting in the NFL would perform as well as Joe Burrow has if they also had Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, and Joe Mixon on their offense. And of course, their head coach. That is not to say that there are 10 quarterbacks better than Joe Burrow. I think Burrow fits well in that offense. It helps that he's a good O-line because he's kind of a pocket passer too. So, I can see where they're coming from, but at the same time, he uses his receiving core and his toolkit as well as anybody in the NFL.
I'm curious, which young quarterback do you think is under the most pressure to win next season? You got a guy like Joe Burrow who's been to 2 AFC championship games in a Super Bowl, hasn't won yet. Josh Allen, a guy you know well because you're from upstate New York, so I'm sure you know a lot of Bills fans. He's under a lot of pressure, you feel like, to eventually get over the hump. Lamar Jackson, he's won an MVP, but he hasn't stayed healthy the last few years, and I think that's kind of been a big reason why the Ravens haven't been able to go far in the playoffs. You got a guy like Justin Herbert, who they just choked up 27-0 against the Jags. So, people will be looking at him to kind of get it done next year. You look at all these young quarterbacks. Is there one that stands out that you say, man, this guy has the most pressure to win next season?
Yeah, you stole it right from my mouth. I think Josh Allen has the most weight on his shoulders coming into next season, simply because the peak that we saw 2 years ago, en route to almost an AFC championship, and the way it collapsed too with the overtime rules and stuff like that, there was a lot of pressure heading into this season already for him to make it back to that and not allow the same thing to occur, right? Although, it wasn't necessarily his fault with the OT rules. But yeah, also being from New York, I can tell that of any fan base, we know that Bills Mafia is the craziest. So in terms of just straight social pressure, I think the most of it falls on Josh Allen, 100 billion%.
So, and by the way, you'd say Bills Mafia is more crazier than the Eagles fan base or the Browns fan base? Because those are two that stand out to mind. It's like, man, these are really passionate fan bases.
I think the only one that compete is Philly. But even then, honestly, I'm not even sure if it's that close. Bills Mafia is the most absurd Little, I don't even want to say fan following. It's like their own cult. It's wild how crazy they are. I mean, look, I can get turned up on a Tuesday or whatever it is and jump off a van into a table and stuff, but not the way those guys do. In cold weather too, with probably a foot of snow on the ground. And I was talking with a couple of Newhouse kids actually last night who were in town because of the women's Syracuse game, and I was asking them, is there snow on the ground back in Syracuse right now? Because I haven't been in a second. They said, oh, there's definitely snow on the ground. And sure enough, today it was -11 back in New York. So, Buffalo fans, they fight through tough temperatures. That's why I think they have the culture that they do. They kind of bond over this disastrous sense of impending doom when a Buffalo winter comes. So they're especially insane.
That's definitely a great perspective to hear. So let's now move, Kyle, to Super Bowl 57 in Glendale, Arizona. It will be a week from this Sunday. Chiefs and Eagles, the two number one seeds in the NFL this year, will meet in the Super Bowl. By the way, there's been a lot of great Super Bowl games at Glendale when you think about recent history as well. But a lot of different storylines in this game. You got the Andy Reid Bowl. Chiefs head coach Andy Reid is facing the coach team rather in the Eagles that he coached for a long time. Took them to a Super Bowl appearance and 5 NFC Championship games. You've got the Kelsey Bowl between Travis Kelsey of the Chiefs and Jason Kelsey of the Eagles. The first time two brothers have played each other in the Super Bowl. We had the Harbaughs coach against each other about a decade ago. And by the way, I mean, I don't know if you've listened or watched any of their New Heights podcasts, but that's a pretty entertaining podcast as well.
Kelseys, they're hilarious. Yeah, they're funny.
Yeah, and then I mean, of course, I think something that's pretty noteworthy is this the first Super Bowl with two black starting quarterbacks and Pat Mahomes and Jalen Hurts. So I mean, again, Kyle, as you look at the Super Bowl, you see the line right now. It's Eagles -1.5. What are some of the biggest storylines, things that stand out to you in this matchup with two number one seeds?
It's interesting. It's close. I think the offensive depth for the Eagles is as good as it's been, and it's obviously a high functioning team because they just have a really strong coach. They really know how to run that offense, and I love the way they do it too. And that Philly special is still the way a lot of people think about it when they want to sum up how that Philly's offense works. They're definitely a dynamic, athletic offense with Hurts at QB. It's interesting. I didn't know that this was the first Super Bowl with two black quarterbacks. It tells you about the developing diversity in the NFL right now. That's really cool. So it should be a fun one. You got the Andy Reid Bowl. I think that is a storyline that people should look at, not just out of pure happenstance, but out of the fact that Reid's got knowledge of the other team. Maybe not as much or as relevant for the specific game, but for that reason, and then on top of the fact that I think quarterback experience is one of the most telling factors in the Super Bowl, I'm going to lean on the side of the Chiefs right now.
Yeah, I mean, you look at, by the way, speaking of Andy Reid, I think this is why, in some ways, you could argue he's just as great of a coach as Bill Belichick because, I mean, you look at the number of assistants that he's had that have not only gone on to be head coaches, but win Super Bowls. You got John Harbaugh, you have Doug Peterson, you have Sean McDermott, who's been really good with the Bills. Ron Rivera made a Super Bowl with the Panthers. One of his former players, D'Amico Ryan, just became head coach of the Texans. So, I think when you look at Andy Reid's coaching tree, and again, you look at Bill Belichick's assistants, I mean, really none of them have gone on to have a successful NFL head coaching career. So, I mean, I think that's kind of one feather in Andy Reid's cap. I was curious, how much pressure do you think is on Pat Mahomes to win this game and win a second Super Bowl? Because he's already been talked about as, he's one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. He may even surpass Brady one day. Now, I don't think anyone's getting seven Brady Super Bowl rings like Tom has, but I mean, I kind of feel like it's you feel some of this pressure on Mahomes. Like, hey, this man's got to win this one to not only win multiple Super Bowls, but kind of cement the conversation that, hey, he really is one of the select few greatest quarterbacks of all time.
Yeah, for that reason, I would say there is definitely a moderate amount of pressure on Pat Mahomes. Does that mean that we're going to see a Pat Mahomes that looks like he's under pressure? I don't think so. It's something like 65% of quarterbacks or quarterback battles in the Super Bowl favor the more tenured quarterback. And I think you're going to see that come next week between the Chiefs and the Eagles. Although there isn't really that much of a difference in tenure, you have a guy like Pat Mahomes who has played and succeeded on the biggest stage. I think that is what will show. And then, although there is definitely pressure on it, I don't think that's going to be displayed.
And do you think, because I was thinking about this, people are not kind of, or maybe Jalen Hurts is kind of a little bit more under the radar going to this game. I mean, I think early on in the season, people were like, oh, this man is a MVP favorite. And he probably would be the MVP if he hadn't gotten hurt for a few games. Now, I think Mahomes is going to win the MVP award. But, you look at it, I mean, Jalen Hurts in his second year starting just made the Super Bowl like Joe Burrow did last year. So he's basically doing the same thing Joe Burrow's done. He's got a great offense, all these great weapons like, AJ Brown and Devontae Smith and Miles Sanders in the backfield. Do you think Jalen Hurts is kind of being underrated a little bit going into this game?
A little bit, and it's a fair underration, honestly, because he has such a crazy toolkit with him. I mean, all those names you just listed alone is enough to provide a top tier NFL offense. I do think he's being a little underrated though, because I've seen flashes of it throughout the regular season, and definitely in his poise so far this NFL playoff run. That although he's still young, he really does have a really sound mentality as a quarterback, which I think is something that is becoming more and more important. You see that with quarterbacks in late in games being able to be poised to make big decisions. You saw it. I'll keep going back to the Dolphins, but you've seen it with Tua, who struggles to make the right plays or decisions in the moment late in games, and he's the same age as the two of them. And then you can provide more examples like, who else can you throw on top? You see it with Josh Allen. Josh Allen definitely showed that he struggled to remain poised in that last game. But of all young quarterbacks outside of Patrick Mahomes, Hurts has been the most impressive to me in terms of being poised in a big game.
I'm curious, kind of, not so much focusing on the game for the Super Bowl, but are there any favorite Super Bowl traditions you have? I mean, are there any like, oh, you've got to have, this chips and dip at the Super Bowl party you go to? I mean, anything kind of stand out to you that you do regularly for Super Bowl Sunday and Super Bowl watch parties?
Oh, geez. I mean, it varies year to year. And now that I'm in college too, it just like depends where I'm going to be and who's watching it. But usually you can't go wrong with Tostitos and salsa. I think that slaps every time. So my tradition is definitely grubbing. And then I'm more entertained by the halftime show and all. Who's our halftime show this year? Is
Rihanna.
it
Yep.
Rihanna? Okay. I can live with that. If she pulls out Umbrella or something like that, I'll be happy with that. I liked last year's halftime show though.
Yeah, I agree. In my opinion, I mean, it's so easy to be prisoner of the moment, but I thought the halftime show last year was the greatest I've ever seen. And I think Rihanna is a popular enough musician that she'll kind of be widely popular to people of all different kinds of music taste. So you are saying that you are excited for Rihanna's halftime performance?
I think it's a good choice. Yeah.
And Chris Stapleton too is doing the national anthem. I'm a country fan, so
Oh,
it'll be good
really?
to good to
Dude.
see. I have a feeling, I don't know what you think about this. I think he'll go under on the national anthem. I think usually the over under is about 2 minutes according to most betting lines, and I just have a feeling like he's a country guy. He's not some extra pop star. Like I think he's gonna do a quick national anthem and stick to under 2 minutes. I don't know what you think about that.
I disagree, man. Think of the song Tennessee Whiskey. He's drawn out and methodical with his voice, and his voice is like freaking made of like blue denim or vinyl or something. You can feel how smooth his vocal cords are. He's freaking good. I'm pumped for that. I had no idea he was doing the national anthem because seriously, Tennessee Whiskey is one of my favorite songs, and he has one of the most beautiful voices I've ever heard of any male country singer. So dang, you just got me pumped for that. That's a freaking good national anthem right there. I'm gonna go over because he's a country guy. I think he's more methodical with his time.
Okay, that's interesting. And I was curious too because I'm a Commanders fan, you're a Dolphins fan. So unfortunately, in our lifetimes, we have not seen either of our teams make the Super Bowl. So, is there a favorite Super Bowl that stands out to you that you've watched, whether it was the way it ended or just the overall game? I mean, that you can remember in your lifetime that, man, this is the best Super Bowl I've watched up to this point.
Jeez, I forgot which Super Bowl it was. Peyton Manning's last Super Bowl.
Oh,
Which
against the
one was that?
Panthers,
Yeah,
Super Bowl 50.
that was a wacky one. That was, I don't know, just looking back at it in the landscape of the NFL, the time in the NFL where Cam Newton, of all people, was like the best quarterback out there was such a wacky season to me because Cam Newton's peak was so strong, so poignant, so pungent, and then it disappeared. To look back and see that he made it all the way to a Super Bowl with the with the Panthers team that he had was so wacky to me. And then the way the Super Bowl started too, where the snap right over Peyton Manning's head, and you're like, oh, this is going to be a long football game, because I think that started with an immediate safety, if I'm not mistaken. So that's the first Super Bowl I think of in recent history. Totally random and honestly insignificant, because it's not like it was that crazy of a football game, but just a weird time in the NFL, I feel like.
So for me, I would say by far the best ending is the Malcolm Butler interception at the 1 yard line, because that was just the most unexpected. Like you like everyone thought Marshawn Lynch was going to run that ball and the Seahawks were going to repeat. So for me, that was the best ending. I would say to me, the most intriguing game I can remember is the Ravens 49ers Super Bowl one. I mean, so many storylines. You had John versus Jim Harbaugh. You had Joe Flacco, who's kind of, irrelevant now, against Colin Kaepernick. And, we've seen how that story's kind of taken off. You had Beyonce, remember, she did the halftime show, and then the electricity went out for like 40 minutes and they had to stop the game. So I would say for all those reasons, I think Ravens 49ers stands out to me in terms of, man, that was, when you think about how to reflect on that game since it happened, I mean, that's something that stands out for sure.
Dang, yeah, actually, you know what? That is a good one. In retrospect, that is kind of a crazy Super Bowl, considering the quarterbacks you had there, where they were at in their careers, and how they've developed since then. Like Flacco's still throwing the ball, man. He was not bad to watch this past season. He definitely was a good leader for that New York football club. So, but yeah, no, that is a wacky one. That's my thing with retrospectively with sports, is not which games were most fascinating because of their performances, but because of the storyline surrounding it. The Harbaugh's one, and then the quarterback battle that I mentioned, like Peyton Manning versus Cam Newton. It's just a complete difference in styles, careers, everything. They were both, at their peaks and ended up in completely different directions. So I like that point you made.
So, yeah, and I know you kind of alluded to it earlier. So even now, I mean, 10 days out before the Super Bowl, right now you are leaning towards picking the Chiefs to win.
Yeah, like I said, I saw some stats somewhere that said somewhere along the line of 60% of quarterback battles in the Super Bowl tend to err on the side of the person who has more tenure in the NFL. And so it's hard for me to, especially with Andy Reid leading the way, it's hard for me to not look at Mahomes, see what he's done already at this stage, and think that he won't shine again against the Eagles. But man, the Eagles have a freaking good defense, so I guess we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going back and forth right now. I'll make my official pick next week, but man, Philly's been really good all year for a reason. So I think that's kind of where I'm leaning right now. But we'll see what happens. I think we both may change our minds before it's all said and done, before the Super Bowl kicks off next Sunday. So great discussion there, Kyle, on the Super Bowl and what we're looking forward to, of course, with the game. To close out the podcast, you've been so generous with your time. I wanted to close out with, again, a couple of just additional sports questions that want to touch on before we hop off here. My first question is, and actually I thought about this while you were talking about it earlier. I hadn't prepared this going in, but you mentioned the whole Fitzmagic Tua, situation where,
Yeah.
and I actually remember it vividly because I had Fitzmagic on my fantasy team and he was actually putting up good numbers. And then I
He
kind of felt
was.
like out of nowhere, the Dolphins just kind of benched him for Tua to say, hey, this is our young guy. Let's just throw him in the fire and see how he goes. Do you think that was the right decision at the time? And do you think maybe it would have impacted Tua's career differently, in the sense that he would have had more time to grow behind Ryan Fitzpatrick, because Fitzpatrick was playing well, and who knows? I mean, maybe he contributed partially to Tua's injury history.
I'm trying to recall when they threw Tua in there, were the Dolphins out of the playoff picture?
I can't recall off the top of my head, but I thought I remember they were like 500. They were still kind of right in the mix. So to me, he was playing well. That's what I remember being so shocked about it, was that they were still kind of
Yeah,
in it, and
that's what
he
I
was
thought.
playing well. Fitzmagic.
Yeah, that's what I thought, because I remember having negative connotations about it initially, for sure, because you know Flores had two choices here. He sticks with Fitzmagic and tries to run through the season and maybe break the playoffs. And even if he does break the playoffs, what's going to happen, right? Or he can get his young quarterback some reps, knowing that next year they can make that next step up if Tua feels more ready. And he just erred on the latter two of the choices. For me, you always go for the win. Because it was shocking to me, because it's the obvious choice talent-wise between the two of them was obviously Fitzpatrick. He was just a better quarterback at the time. He was more experienced. So for me, I think that was the wrong decision. You want to go for the win no matter what. But I do see the reasoning behind Tua hopping in at that point in time.
And I was curious about what your take is on Syracuse basketball, because you still follow the team. You grew up a fan of Syracuse. Jim Boeheim, I mean, you saw how the Hokies exploited that zone last week when the Orange came to town. And you look at Boeheim, he's older than Roy Williams and Coach K, who both retired in the last couple of years. Do you think it's time for Jim Boeheim to retire?
I hate to say it, but yeah, you know, he's had such a long career at Syracuse, and you can't get inside the guy's head. His choice is his choice, but I feel, and a lot of people get the sense that he's hanging on. That's the way they would describe it. It's just not the same program it used to be. They used to be perennial NCAA tournament contenders, obviously the national championship in '03, and since then they had been, in the tournament every year. It's tough. The argument that a lot of people bring up is that because people see that he has one foot out the door, that they don't recruit as well as they used to. I disagree with that. I still think that the pool of talent, although it may not be what it used to be, is still good. I mean, they picked up a top 50 prospect the other day, a 4-star prospect. I forgot the kid's name, but I knew it was a great pickup. So for me, it's really about the trajectory of the program. It only looks more positive if Boeheim is definitive on when he's leaving and who is going to be taking over that role. Like Krzyzewski had Shire by his side. He was that guy. The people who were working under Krzyzewski, the players that were there, knew who they had coming up next. And for Syracuse, that guy used to be Mike Hopkins. But then Mike Hopkins went to Washington. So then, it goes down that ladder. You have McNamara or Adrian Autry off the bench, and they would both fill in the head coaching role great. But it's not the same image as Hopkins. Like Hopkins was that assistant coach who was there for so long and knew the program and the 2-3 so well that people were ready for Boeheim to go, knowing that it would fall into the right hands, and then he was gone. I think that changed the trajectory of what Boeheim's end of his career would look like. And we're seeing it right now when you don't have a certain surefire guy to take over the program the way that Boeheim wants to after him. It's just like, it just feels like, Boeheim's, the only guy in the masthead running the show, and you don't know what the era of Syracuse college basketball is going to look like after that.
Do you think, if assuming, Boeheim retires here sooner or later, do you think Syracuse should try to go after Mike Hopkins and try to lure him back from Washington, or do you think that ship has sailed?
I don't know whether or not the ship has sailed yet, but I think that would be a great deal. For me, yeah, I've talked about it with my buddy Gio before, as a big Syracuse guy. Him and I, as Syracuse fans, from that perspective, would love if they could get Hopkins back, because then that would regain that draw of the Boeheim era, right? Because Boeheim is Syracuse college basketball, and there's no, controversy or conversation about that. There's no one else who creates the program and runs the program the way Boeheim does in college basketball. But I think Hopkins would be great if they could somehow go out and get him. If not, I really don't see a problem with going to Adrian Autry or Jerry McNamara, but they got to start to realize to bring a modern twist to what they call the 2-3 zone, because the 2-3 is outdated now. It was designed to force teams to shoot 3 balls, but every team can shoot the 3 ball now. That's basketball. So it's outdated for me. They got to move on from the 2-3, but maintaining that same sense of the Boeheim era is what will kind of keep that trajectory of the program upward.
Yeah, I was going to say, too, I thought one other thing is that, Boeheim also kind of designed that system in an era where power forwards and centers didn't shoot threes. But now,
Nope.
If you're on the floor, you pretty much can shoot a 3, it seems like. So I think that's something that got exploited when they played the Hokies last week. And I wanted to ask you, too, about this is something that I've also debated with Evan Hughes, our mutual friend here, and that is college football versus the NFL. I know you mentioned earlier you're not as big of an NFL guy, and my take on this has been, I think that, I believe that the NFL is better purely from a parity and entertainment standpoint, because, you look at every year, you've got a lot of teams that you really feel like have a legit shot to win the Super Bowl. And really the NFL is built for 8-8, where you can be the worst team. I think you look at the Bengals a couple years ago, I think they were the worst team in the NFL. And a couple years later, they're in the Super Bowl. So you can kind of get back to, quote unquote, the elite, a sphere of teams quickly. Whereas in college football, look, in terms of going to a game, like I would rather go to a Virginia Tech game in person than, say, a Commanders, who that's my team, game in person. But you look at the college football playoff, I really feel like, if anything, it's actually hurt the parity in the league, because it's really only been a select few teams: Clemson, Alabama, Oklahoma, Georgia, maybe a couple other teams where you really feel like have a chance to win a championship. and then teams like Virginia Tech and Syracuse are on the outside looking in. And honestly, I hate to say it, but you feel like never have a chance to win it all. Now, maybe the expanded playoff format might help with that, but I mean, you just look at it from a standpoint of like playoff games. I mean, college football had two great semifinals this year, but I mean, I think overall NFL playoff games are really more exciting. The element of fantasy football, you bring that into a game. Like if I have fantasy football players playing, like I am going to watch Jets and Jaguars, even if I have no other stake in the game other than my fantasy players are playing. I mean, I just think from the total package, I think the NFL is better, but obviously I know you might have a different perspective having grown up in Syracuse. So what's kind of your take on that whole debate?
Yeah, Syracuse college football growing up, it wasn't what it used to be. And then they had this era with Coach Babers that's still ongoing now, where they're kind of settling into a reign of success, but if not mediocrity, because we've seen some struggles with it. So that's painted my picture of what I feel about college football up until this point. I'll agree with you on this, that there's definitely more parity in NFL football. So from a fan perspective, it's hard not to like it as much. But first of all, you have non-Power 5 teams finally entering that picture for the college football playoff. You saw it with Cincinnati. So I think the parity in college football is improving. And on top of that, now you're going to get the expanded playoff format. But to your credit, yeah, there really is a lot of top heaviness to college football. Even in the college football playoff, you get a lot of lopsided games. We've seen an entire playoffs go, all three games are completely lopsided. So yeah, I agree with you in that college football can be very, very top heavy and dynastic, as in a lot of dynasties too.
Do you think that the expanded playoff will help with parity in terms of it will help more, like it will give more teams a chance to win? Or do you think more than likely one or two is going to still probably win, but at the very least, you're going to have teams that can say they went to the playoff, and it'll make the regular season for more teams more meaningful, especially late in the season?
Yeah, I think because the regular seasons are going to be more meaningful and there's more teams, making the playoffs, I'm going to say that it'll help the parity a little bit. I really don't think there's much you can do in college football to remove the fact that Georgia and Alabama, and most of the time Clemson are like those three schools that you literally cannot help but allow into the college football playoff. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, that's the way it feels. I don't think there's much you can do for that. But the thing with the college football playoff expanded format is those are a couple extra games a year for some teams that means a lot more money for those teams. So look, is it going to make a lot more teams towards the top strong? Yes. But that means that Georgia, Alabama, and Clemson are going to be a little bit closer in competition to the rest of these teams. The TCUs or maybe even like the UNCs out there making that what is it, a 12-team format now?
Yep.
So those top 10 teams, they're going to get more funding and more money out of these college football playoff games, and that I think will affect the strength of a lot of usually mid-level ranked programs, turning them into similar level powerhouses. Although again, I think the echelon of Georgia is a different level compared to most teams.
But what do you think about this conference realignment that's happening in college football? I mean, you've got Texas and Oklahoma eventually going to make their way to the SEC. USC and UCLA are going to make their way to the Big Ten. There's been talk of some of the standout programs in the ACC like Clemson and Florida State, Miami, maybe eventually leaving their conference as well. I mean, do you think it's going to make the sport a two conference league and really render leagues like the ACC, which does have Tech and Syracuse, really irrelevant in the national picture?
Yeah, I think dude, the SEC and the Big Ten are going to be, the two big names. The Big 12 with that. ACC and the Pac-12, I think that's what two conferences are kind of dying out in relevance in terms of college football right now. So yeah, I agree with that. You tend to see over time a lot of sports organizations reorganize and align powers into more singular centric conferences, and that's what we're seeing in college football right now.
My final question for you, Kyle, you've been so gracious with your time. We're almost an hour into this podcast, is LeBron James. He is closing in on Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's all-time scoring record. He has 63 points away from eclipsing that record. So selfishly, I hope that he breaks it against the Bucks next Thursday, because that'll be a nationally televised game. So my question for you is, where does LeBron rank in terms of greatest players ever? I mean, is he number one in your book? Because obviously, me and you, we didn't grow up watching Prime Jordan. Our best memories of him are from the Last Dance. But what do you think LeBron ranks for you? Is he the greatest player of all time, or do you go with Jordan or someone else?
For me, it's Jordan. It's not even a conversation. You can propose the argument about the differences in talent and strength between Jordan's day and LeBron's day, but in all honesty, their times almost overlap, as a matter of fact. So I really don't think, first of all, there's much of a difference in terms of talent pool that they played against. On top of that, I think the feats Jordan had were more impressive in terms of overall accolades. But on a singular basis, I think at their peak, LeBron James for me was a better hooper than Jordan. So like you put those two guys prime one on one, I'm going LeBron James in the one on one personally. But in terms of overall career, I think Jordan was the not even the best basketball player. For me, Michael Jordan's the greatest athlete of all time.
Wow. But see, the reason, for me, it's a lot closer is I think one thing you have to give him LeBron's cap is, he led three separate franchises to NBA championships. And then also, I mean, Michael Jordan won all of his championships with Phil Jackson, who's one of the greatest coaches ever. I mean, you look at, I think it's five different coaches that LeBron has taken to the finals. And a lot of these guys, I mean, they didn't do anything after they left LeBron. Mike Brown, David Blatt, Ty Lue, who's actually a good coach, Eric Spoelstra, who's a top 15 coach. But, you look at kind of their teams. I mean, the coaches that he had to play with, it's not like he played with a great coach or a great supporting cast. So I think that's one thing in LeBron's cap. And actually, one other thing, I don't know if you agree with this or not. I don't even think it's actually a hot take. I think if you look at just the career, I mean, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, to me, what he was able to do over the course of his career, played 20 years, all-time leading scorer for so long, 6 MVPs, that's the most ever, 6 championships. Collegiately, he was a success, 3 national championships at UCLA. High school, he won 3 championships. I mean, I think if you look at who had the best career as a basketball player on all levels, I think Kareem Abdul-Jabbar has a strong case to be the number one guy in that regard.
I like that. And if you want to talk about favoring it from a longevity route, then you're going to pull me towards guys like Bill Russell, in my opinion. So if you want to talk Kareem, then for me, you start putting guys like Russell in that same conversation, the real retro players. But dude, that guy's got 11 rings. It's like freaking ridiculous. So, but then the ring argument makes it even more complicated. But in terms of longevity, yeah, I think Kareem is a great guy to go to. That's not a bad argument at all.
Kyle, this has been such a great conversation, getting to talk to you about a wide range of topics. I guess what's next on your docket in terms of what can people expect to see from you, where they can see you in terms of content wise? Like what are some of the things you'll be working on this spring, and where can people see you in terms of viewing your broadcast content?
Oh, geez. I mean, it's all over the place. I'm not really good at it on social media. I should be better with it. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on this. It's really cool that you care to have me on because of what's going on in my life, as well as my irrelevant thoughts on the NFL and stuff like that. So I appreciate that. Going forward right now, actually, it was funny that you brought up St. Cloud and you and I talked about it, because I'm literally just now getting some notes in on some of our players. So for what I'm going to be up to, probably in my room writing bios up for some players on the roster. But in terms of in the public eye, I'll be working very closely with the softball team here at Tech this next semester, which I'm very excited for. But otherwise, I'm really just counting down the days until I have to head off to Minnesota. I've never been out in the Midwest before, so I'm excited.
Kyle, like I said, thanks a lot, man. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, man.
That's Kyle Marchak, class of 2025, SMA at Virginia Tech. You can see him on all different kinds of platforms, whether it's Tech Sidelines, St. Cloud Rocks in the summer, Hoagie Sports. This has been the latest edition of the Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us, and we'll see you next time.